Hey, here we are. Holy dolly. I'm like got the jitterbugs.
Do you want me to go into a first question from there? Should I?
Yeah. Do you I kind of yeah, if you've got one off the
It
top of your
Yeah.
sounds
head.
very
Yeah,
formal, guys. It
Well,
sounds
it
see,
is.
that's what I
It
mean. I
is.
thought, oh, okay, it is now. Okay,
No,
I'm
I'm joking.
confused.
No, I'm joking. I'm just making you nervous. You
Got
have
it.
done some pretty epic bloody research though that does need
sweating.
airtime.
Oh, really? But then, like, do I
Really?
remember any of it? But
Oh, Tam well, she read them.
Well,
oh,
I wasn't
good.
going
You'll
to
know more than
ask.
me.
I did read them because I just get interested. And then I do get confused about the
Yeah.
research journey, which I think I'll ask a question about as well, because I'm
Okay.
sure if I'm confused, other people
Yeah.
will be confused too.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
about
Start
what
with
it
that.
means. Yeah. No, well, I might start with,
Okay.
yeah, anyway, we'll see. I'll just
Have
pull
you
Start
myself
with
talked
together.
about
whatever.
what questions? Have you talked about questions
No.
No.
behind my
No, that's
back?
what I mean.
Oh,
I
No.
tried to,
No.
right? 2 weeks ago, but everyone
Yes.
fobbed me off.
Yes.
So no, we have
Sorry.
not
I
spoken
should have
about
done that.
questions.
Sorry, Tam.
guys, I'm sweating.
Okay, let's just start. Go,
Okay, let's
Joe.
go. All right. All right. Today's guest needs absolutely no introduction to this audience, of course. However, there is something new about her. She is no longer on the long road towards a PhD. She has one.
Oh,
Introducing to you all Dr. Laurie Forner. So
With the
Laurie
hat.
is here to tell us all about what she found in her PhD. Most of you, of course, will recognize that Laurie, with her research focused on heavy lifting on pelvic organ support, has changed the way we think about load and risk of pelvic organ prolapse in our clinics. The impact of Laurie's research has been huge for us clinicians and ultimately for women. So we're very excited to hear all about the nitty-gritty details and how we can utilize Laurie's research in this clinic even more, or in our clinic, I should say, even more.
Aside from Laurie's PhD helping clinics do a better job for women, it introduced Laurie to the world of ultrasonography, of which she, of course, fell in love with and is now studying a graduate diploma of obstetrics and gynecology sonography at Western Sydney University while she works at Queensland Ultrasonography for Women. Congratulations, Dr. Laurie Forner, and welcome to your own podcast where you get
oh,
interviewed.
so hard to be on this side. I just want to
Awful, isn't
sit and
it?
chat. And I thought I think a part of me was like, oh, we're just going to chat about like the journey and not my research. But hey, someone else
Bit of
will
both.
remember it all. Yeah. Yeah. It's weird. Look, I'm never going to use the term doctor. But I don't know when I would use it. Like I just flew on the plane and there's no way I'm saying doctor on a plane because I can't.
Mm.
Unless like, I don't know,
Someone
does
has a
it
cardiac arrest, you're it.
it's red. I'm like, you can have a rectal exam or
Imagine.
I don't have my ultrasound with me, but I can tell you about sound waves. I don't know.
Oh, love it, Laurie. Well, I reckon we start with your story, though, honestly, because I would imagine that before you decided to start on your long journey towards a PhD, you probably had a question in mind or a thought or something you wanted answered. I guess the
Yeah.
question is, what was that question that you wanted answered? And did you get the answer? And was it the answer that you thought it would be?
Those things change constantly.
I would imagine.
I feel like people have heard this story so many times, so I always feel like I'm repeating
No,
myself
you
all
have not.
really?
We don't
Okay,
know it.
well,
No. Yeah.
you guys don't know it? Oh, surely you do.
Well,
I'll
we want
tell
to hear
it
it
and
again.
I'm like, everyone will know it. Well, I was working as a clinician in doing pelvic floor and let's remember this was like a decade ago at least, okay? Because before I got into actually formally doing a PhD, I was talking with some other colleagues about doing research in this area. So there was so much research and focus on stress urinary incontinence. And we had a lot of patients, as I'm sure everybody has and actually still does, where they're like, oh, you can't do this exercise because, you know, you're going to make your pelvic floor worse. And at that time, you weren't allowed to run. You weren't allowed to do any weightlifting, no strength train. Like you can't lift anything more than 5 kilos. And I had a lot of women who were already doing those activities, and they were coming in for something sort of, they were coming in for a pelvic floor issue, but it didn't seem to be made worse by, and it started with running. And I remember thinking, that's weird, that she's running and that's not making her worse. It seems to be something else, like straining on the toilet, right? Or I had patients who running was their mental health savior. If you took that away from them, they wouldn't cope. And so I remember thinking, I've got to work out a way that they can continue running while we work on other parts of their pelvic floor. And I think, I don't think pessaries were in my area at that time. So it was still more about working pelvic floor muscles. But soon we started playing around with pessaries to help. And again, it just had that focus of, how do you keep getting someone to do especially exercise that they love? Because if you take it away, they're probably not going to do anything, right? And we know that sedentary and then overweight and obesity is actually worse than potentially having some leaking, right? Even though it sucks and it can kind of get worse as well. And then it went towards the strength training side where it was all about heavy lifting. And this is when CrossFit started to be like, what is this like?
Trendy.
Probably, 12, 13 years ago. And I remember thinking, oh, women should not be doing this exercise. And I've never been able to teach it, but I've always known if you want to influence people, you need to become part of their community or no one will listen to you. And I could see that CrossFit was a community cult, It's like, okay, I need to be able to tell these women and teach these women that they shouldn't be doing this. So I need to embed myself into this culture so that I can then manipulate their minds and give
I
them
honestly did not realize that, Laurie. I thought you were a CrossFitter.
Yeah,
Okay.
same.
We're not there yet.
Okay, fine. Obviously,
no.
okay.
Yeah, no. I was like, oh my God, this is so bad. I need to, get in this culture. I need to do it not only so I
I
understand.
can manipulate their minds.
Yes. Not only to understand myself what it is, but my original goal was, again, I'm going to be part of that community and culture so that I can infiltrate and take them out of it. And I have a gymnastics background too. So, and I didn't really know what I was getting into, right? And I went into it and I was learning, and the place that I was at, which is no longer there, but it was two 19-year-old coaches, but they were really smart and they were just, telling you, okay, well, if you can't do any of this, they broke it down like a physio would and been like, actually start with this. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not so bad. And the whole time I'm doing these exercises, I'm working out how to bring pelvic floor into it, because before I take my women out of that while I'm manipulating their minds, I'm also going to teach them how to modify it, right? And how to add their pelvic floor to it. So every day I would go and do this exercise and work out how to modify it. And I remember thinking, this is just like physio. Like they've made an exercise, they've broken it down, they've made it easier. And if that exercise is really hard, but I've made it really easy and I gradually progress, oh my God, that's exactly what we do as physios. This isn't horrible. And then I started to enjoy it, because then there was lots of handstands and handstand walking. And then there's all these skills that you see, like swinging on bars, that I was like, oh my God, I want to be able to learn to do that. I can bring my pelvic floor into that. I can make it easier. I can change intra-abdominal pressure. And I really started to like it. And and then you see the community and you see the culture and you're like, the only time I've ever been consistent with exercise was when I paid an insane amount of money to go, it is insane, to this place, which, I mean, obviously only people who are fortunate enough to be able to afford something like that, right? But to pay money that they then encourage you to go a certain number of times a week, and it's like a schedule. And I mean, it's now been 12 years, and we won't talk about how consistent I've been in the last year. But I just grew to like it. And I was like, oh my God, I actually think now I can help the people that are in this. And I've totally changed minds. Like now I don't think people need to join CrossFit, right? I think you find what you love, but and so many other gyms now have CrossFit type model and functional fitness, right? And strength training, because we know how beneficial it is. But I can see how if you are able to afford it, how it really can help with that continuity of health and exercise, as opposed to I am so bad at doing anything at home. My husband bought me a barbell last year so I could do it on the days that I'm not able to make it to the gym. And I have lifted it 3 times. I'm not going to do it at home. But yeah, so see how I get off tangents. Anyway, that's how it all started. So I joined CrossFit and was like, woohoo.
Great story. I was exactly the same as Tam.
Oh my God.
I did. You were CrossFitter and wanted to demonstrate that CrossFitting is not harmful.
No, but I didn't even get to the initial question that Tam asked. Where did that question come from? That's where it came from. Sorry, I will go back. I apologize. And then people have to hear me talking the whole time.
No, perfect.
So boring. Okay, so within that journey, then I'm doing all this exercise and I'm having all those people like the runner where the doctors, physios, everyone is saying, don't lift more than 5 kilos. And we had a government initiative to help decrease incidences of pelvic floor dysfunction, highlighting who might be at risk, right? What women might be at risk of pelvic floor and what exercises you should and shouldn't do. It was a very blanket pelvic floor, yes and no. And strength training, not in general, because it's in the exercise guidelines that people need to strength train. But if women were pregnant, if they'd ever been pregnant, if they had a vaginal delivery, if they were an elite athlete, if they had a chronic cough, if they're overweight, if they're obese, the list of who shouldn't partake in certain exercises was more than 50% of women. And you're like, okay, well, this is really hard to tell. This is my patient population. And the no exercises really were aimed at the time because of the research we had, but when you look back in the research, we just read it wrong, was anything that increased intra-abdominal pressure, which is everything, right? So there just was okay, well, how are people supposed to participate in any kind of strength training without putting pressure on their pelvic floor? And prolapse and incontinence are the 2 biggest ones, especially at the time. And all the research was incontinence. So I went, okay, well, I have so many women with prolapse. I want to be able to help them, because I then started, because I was in the CrossFit world, all these women that were doing that exercise started to come and see me. And I'm like, well, I don't want to take them out of it now. I need to work out a way to get them to do it. And you could see that not only did we need to find the answers for us as physios, but this is where manipulating minds, right? I'm manipulating the CrossFit minds. I'm like, well, how do I change the doctors? We need to be in research so that there's published papers so that they're like, oh, okay, now I'll listen to you, because they won't listen to you unless they see it written in a paper. Yeah. So then I was manipulating doctors' minds.
As opposed to the CrossFitters.
As opposed to the CrossFitters. Right. So that's what the Pelvic Health Podcast has been this whole time, is just manipulating minds.
Excellent. And so many minds you've reached, Laurie, so many minds. So one of the papers, one of your early papers, which was a massive game changer, certainly for us, was the cross-sectional survey that you did on 750 women or something, which is enormous. And, I actually remember, I don't know if you do, Tam, us reading it going, holy shit, okay, we totally need to rethink how we're advising women. So can you tell us a little bit more about that study, Laurie? Do you remember it?
Well, it depends. So wait, are you talking about the online one where people?
Yes.
We had more than 4,000 women.
Oh gosh, where'd I get 750?
Yeah, I was like 750. I don't know what paper you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that was one of the initial papers. So I said, before I actually formally went into PhD, I was talking with some colleagues. We were going to do some some research. It wasn't going anywhere. And that was for a few years. And I went, okay, I'm going to formally do a PhD. And when I started the PhD, they were like, okay, do a systematic review and meta-analysis. And there's no information on, pelvic organ prolapse at the time. I then changed it to support and heavy lifting. And so they're like, okay, let's start with a survey study. I was like, cool. So I spent a year organizing, designing based on, some of our questionnaires that we have, like the pelvic floor distress inventory, the EPIC, where we're asking patients about different subjective types of pelvic floor issues that they might have: stress incontinence, pelvic organ prolapse, bowel incontinence. I added a little bit of pain in there, and then getting kind of a general history, how many pregnancies, how many, vaginal deliveries, forceps. So starting to look at all the risk factors that we knew that might lead to different types of pelvic floor issues. And then adding the exercise component into it. So we wanted to make sure we weren't just focusing it towards people who had problems. And we wanted to look at who was doing strength, some sort of strength training, but also trying to make sure that you're sort of separating, okay, is someone running and doing a bit of body weight, right? So we're just trying to include all exercise. We had running, Pilates, like we just had a list of like tick and flick that you could say which types of exercise you're doing. And one of the like leading questions was, because at the time 15 kilos was our cutoff, right? For I said 5 kilos. That was like an American cutoff for potential intra-abdominal pressure increases. Whereas in Australia, 15 kilos, and I don't know about your states, Queensland, it was a very Queensland number in the physio world, but it seemed to be more, I think it came from like the doctors, where they're like, do not lift more than 15 kilos if you've, have any pelvic floor issue or prolapse. And I remember trying to find out where that 15 kilos came from, and I could not find it in the research anywhere. But because it was kind of anecdotal, we used that as our lead question. If you lift more than 15 kilos, it took you to a place where you could then, I think we had it in 10 kilogram increments of, do you lift between 16 and 20, and then 20 and 30 in kilos, and what types of exercises you would do. And then if you didn't lift more than 15 kilos, it would ask why, like, why not? Why didn't you lift more than 15 kilos? And I think there was also like a sedentary section. It was a long time ago. And so then in the people who were doing the lifting, I think everyone towards the end, like there was, I think 96 questions. Way too long, but we really tried to cut it down. But depending on what question you answered, you may not have answered all 96. At the very end is where we used the pelvic floor questions. And I said we had over 4,000 women within a 3-month period. I had to cut it off because I was like, oops, I've never used Excel. How am I going to do this? Because we asked about BMI and there was so many questions in there. But yeah, at 3 months, I went, I'm going to cut it off because it started to dwindle. But I was also like, I have to look at this stuff. So we, cut it there. And you could see people got tired of answering the questions. So we only had 3,946 or something that had answered all the prolapse questions for the pelvic floor. And then, what else do you want me to answer about it? That was the survey.
That was the survey.
Yeah, that was the survey. So, so the actual study itself. See, guys, I can ramble.
It's good quality ramble, though.
Is it really, though? Is it really?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was our lead study to say that this is an important thing to look at, because subjectively, which we know, objectively, when we look at someone's pelvic floor with our eyes and our hands, it can be different than what they say, right? In the end, with a caveat, obviously, but in the end, someone's subjective report of their symptoms is the most important thing. So we broke it down into sedentary, people who lift less than 15 kilos, And then we kind of did like a moderate heavy lifting, which heavy is subjective, but we had to make cutoffs. And then like a heavy lifting. So it was sedentary, light lifting, moderate lifting, heavy lifting. So sedentary, obviously not doing any lifting. Less than 15 kilos was light. Moderate was what, like 16 to 50 kilos, I decided. That was just a random cutoff. And then greater than 50 kilos. And that was like people saying what their heaviest was that they lifted a few times a week, right? So what we had found was that, and then we also took, like, not only did we take the prevalence in order to then see kind of the influence of those risk factors, you put it into these weird statistical models that I had to learn myself because we don't have a statistician. I was like, sorry, what? Really hard, but I found a lot of like stats for dummies and, you know, YouTube. It really does make you understand your research more, though, if you do your own statistics. And I look back and I'm like, I could not reproduce that again because that was so hard. But you take all those risk factors again, like, did you have forceps? Was it a vaginal delivery? Have you gone through menopause? All of those other kind of, you know, BMI, age, all those things. And you try to work out, okay, do any of those things influence their answers? And how much do they influence their answers? So we found that if you were sedentary or lifting light, your response of saying, yes, I have the sensation of a prolapse. And we use that one single question for prolapse of, do you have the sensation of a vaginal bulge or lump in the vagina? Because we know with research, and even at that time, that that is most associated with us physically seeing or feeling a prolapse, generally about stage 2. So kind of coming to the entrance of the vagina when you strain down. And so the sedentary people and the light lifting were more, they had a higher prevalence of reporting that sensation compared to moderate and heavy. And the heavy lifters were actually the lowest of reporting that symptom. And when we looked at all the risk factors, you know, you were more likely to report sensation of that bulge if you had a vaginal delivery. So 5 times more likely. And we, again, know that through the literature. If you'd had a history of constipation or straining, which is a really funny question because that's really the only way we asked it was, do you have a history of hemorrhoids or straining? And actually, I would take that question out now because that just kind of means nothing. Like that could mean so many things, but that was one of the ones that influenced it. Age a little bit, like I think it was like a little bit over 1 time would influence it. Someone else, you guys have read it. What were the other ones that influenced it? I just remember, yeah, vaginal parity was one of the biggest ones that influenced, but that was the one to highlight these women lifting heavier weights aren't saying. So I was very specific in saying, because you could see people on social media afterwards saying heavy lifting, what would they say? Like heavy lifting is good for your pelvic floor or something. I'm like, no, that's not what we said. We said it's not worse than lifting lighter, as in the people aren't saying they have more symptoms, not that it's better. So it was just trying to highlight that they're not the ones saying that they have more symptoms. And then we asked, well, if you're lifting, so they're like, well, what about the light lifters? Did they stop lifting because they had symptoms? I'm like, good question. We asked that. Yeah. So we asked them, are you not lifting heavier because of symptoms or fear of symptoms? And there was things like, because you have diastasis or you're worried about diastasis. Like there's so much more research you could do with that survey, but we had to cut it off.
And what did they say? Do you know?
So only about, I'm trying to think the number, I think it was like 14% or less than that reported that, and I think we grouped them together, that they had symptoms or were worried about developing symptoms of prolapse, which is why they weren't lifting more than that. And other things were like, I don't have access, it's not a priority, I've been told not to. And then unfortunately, the sedentary group was the highest group of reporting that sensation, and we missed the ball. We didn't ask them why they were sedentary, so they could have just had a baby, right? Like they could be early postpartum and they weren't lifting, but we didn't capture that. So that's a little bit sad. But yeah, that was like our first study just to highlight, hey, these aren't the women that are saying they have more. We need to look into it further.
And where did you go from there? What was next?
Well, then was to objectively look, right? Let's take all the heavy lifters and let's look with our eyes and let's assess the women who are heavy lifting to see if they actually do have more descent. Unfortunately, in research and PhD, people sidetrack your ideas. And my ideas and the goal was hijacked and sidetracked to a place that we got good information from it, but it wasn't where I wanted it to go. And where I wanted it to go didn't get there till the very end. And those two papers that have been written that aren't published, that may never see the light of day because I have cleaned my hands and burnt the last 10 years out of my mind, were the main goal, which is just really sad. But
hang on a minute. So the papers have been written. So you just need like Tam to maybe like submit it to a journal.
We've submitted both of them and they were rejected. And unfortunately, they were advised to be submitted to a journal that I knew wouldn't be accepted because again, the way they were done was also different than what I had kind of hoped and planned. And the two papers I think should have been one. So I based a lot of that idea and structure around that Middlecoff paper, right? Monique Middlecoff's paper. You guys are like, yeah, sure, that one.
No, I don't know it. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's why I was
It was like one of the first papers that had women, who were doing CrossFit, but she didn't kind of really use that term, where she had the nulliparous women who were walking versus lifting. No, not ringing a bell.
Blank.
Okay.
No, sorry.
We maybe just me interviewed her. She's been on the podcast talking about this paper that honestly changed my life. She's just brilliant, but she did it with like Ingrid Nygaard and that whole team, which is brilliant. So they looked at nullips, young, either walking for 20 minutes or heavy lifting for 20 minutes, which was actually a little CrossFit workout. And they're accustomed to those exercises. So the walkers always walk and they never lift, and the lifters always do CrossFit for at least 6 months. And they did pop Q, and I think they did like vaginal pressure readings and hand grip strength. No, not ringing a bell. Anyway, they looked at them before they did that activity, sent them out, did 20 minutes of the activity, and came back and reassessed them. And they had found that there was no difference between the two groups, but both groups after exercise decreased in their pelvic organ support, right? Their pelvic floor muscle resting tone was less. Their squeeze pressure, I think, was less. There wasn't any change. They had a little bit of more descent in their pop Q, but both groups did, but there wasn't a difference between the two groups.
Yeah.
And they used that one study to compare the two groups before they did exercise, right? As in this population against this population who regularly do these exercises. So again, lifters, non-lifters, and then what happens after 20 minutes of exercise, and comparing the two groups. And that's really what I had based this whole research around. So these two papers are sort of broken up. They're heavy lifters against non-lifters. And then we took
which I feel like Joe and I were a part of.
But then I got ditched.
You did get
ditched. You did,
yeah. You got ditched.
Totally ditched, yeah. Then we took the heavy lifters, and then we did some heavy lifting and measured pre.
Probably because I can't lift heavy.
No, that wasn't it.
No, that's not
the
why.
Non-lifting group.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
the non-lifting group.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to share why you got excluded, you can.
Not unnecessary.
Unnecessary. Well, yeah. So you guys know how long I was collecting that data,
Yeah, it
right?
was
And look,
amazing with you.
I know.
Yeah. So it
3D
was
ultrasound.
it was
Yeah, yeah,
non-lifting, lifting. Yeah, it was
yeah.
pop Q. It was all pelvic floor muscle testing, and it was ultrasound. Looking at avulsion as well, no? Like
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, that all actually, look, COVID messed a lot of it up, right? And that all that data though was finished collecting probably 3 years ago. And I was just pushing and pushing to trying to get it out there and get it done, but was unfortunately pushed to focus on other elements and other studies that again were interesting and have been published, but it was never what I wanted. And that frustration of knowing what you wanted
Mm.
and pushing to get there, but constantly being pulled back, was unfortunate. And also, again, I think like 6 years of that or 5 years of that kind of added to my drop down into burnout and
Mm.
the start of Lexapro.
Which,
That was
yeah.
the journey to Lexapro. But again, those have been, they were, yeah, put into a journal. They should have been one paper. I think they were put into a journal that I knew wouldn't. They take, many months to tell you that it's
Mm.
rejected. And
So, as Joe said, is there any way to move it to another journal or get it? And if it's not published, forgive me for my lack of
Can you
knowledge here.
still
Can you not talk about it? You
tell
can't
us?
I
talk
can
about
I can talk about it,
it.
especially because, like, again, the in my mind, I'm like, but they're old now, and there's other stuff that has come out. So I'm like
No, we
that.
want to know.
But
Yeah,
we want
no,
to
I'm
know.
going to tell
Yeah.
you guys, but from a
Yeah.
publishing point of view, I'm like, I feel like
Mm,
we lost the mark, right? Like,
mm,
and I talked about my research so much that other people took those ideas and did
mm,
really good research with them. And I'm like, pipped at the post, which you can't have one paper saying one thing, right?
mm.
You need more papers talking about the same concept. But I think I just finally got my little PDF, right, of my degree. I finally, like, it has taken so long because of stupid policies and things that I'm in a PTSD era,
Mm.
right? That I'm
You
like, okay, I
fancy us making you talk about it today in your
well, I
PTSD.
did tell you that
Sorry.
I said I was ready to discuss it, but to go back into those papers and,
Yeah.
make corrections and fix and have to
Mm.
converse with,
Yeah, I get it.
yeah, you're just like, honestly, I
No,
just need
just
to burn
absolutely
that
not.
shit
Yeah,
and move
Yeah.
yeah.
on. Yeah.
Oh,
Should
well.
we over a fire?
Yeah. Well, but
Yeah.
who print? Well, I guess I have to print them out and then we
Burning
can burn it.
ceremony.
I reckon it would help.
That'd be
Yeah,
fun.
it probably would, but it'll still be on my computer. So,
Mm.
Okay,
but yeah,
so we're here at the Pelvic
yeah,
Health Podcast.
yeah,
Here
yeah.
for the first time.
Uh-huh.
You can hear the results. Go.
Okay. So I'm not going to go into it as specific detail as that
No,
survey study, because
that's
even though
fine.
that was so long ago, it's actually so embedded in my mind. Whereas this one just comes with so much like resentment and emotion in it that I've like tried to block it out. But essentially, we took women who were not lifting any heavy weight, so nothing more than 15 kilos, right? So they could be doing body weight, they might be doing lightweight at least a few times a week, at least 6 months. And then we took heavy lifters. So we had to define heavy because heavy is not really defined. You can look at the strength and conditioning, and heavy might be in some papers greater than 80% of your 1 rep max, or you could use body weight, right? So we tried to use something to show that these women regularly lift heavy weight. So we kind of mixed like greater than 80% of body weight, but also greater than 80% of their, like, because your 1 rep max, right, could be 30 kilos because you don't lift too heavy. And 80% of that would be, don't make me do math on the spot. I'm going to pick 20, but I know it's not.
I wouldn't know it anyway.
Good, ChatGPT. And I'm like, well, is 20 kilos? Yes, it might be heavy to them, right? This is where that term heavy is really very,
I see.
person specific. That's their heavy. Like if you can imagine a 90-year-old who's never lifted any weight before, 10 kilos is their heavy. But we know in the physio doctor world, I wanted to have a bigger number. So we went, okay, in the powerlifting, Olympic lifting, CrossFit world, if you look at some of the data in the strength and conditioning, they say that like your goal for squats or deadlifts is to lift at least your body weight or 1.5 times your body weight. So that's when I went, okay, let's take body weight as the lifting. And I went, well, we know deadlifts people will lift more than squats because it's easier to lift that much. And that's generally 1.5 times body weight. So we said, okay, if your kind of heaviest lifting is at least kind of 80% or more of your body weight for squats or deadlifts, then we'll consider you a heavy lifter. And it has to be regular. So I think most of the women were lifting at least their body weight. No, I think most of the women in the study were lifting like at least their body weight, but more, probably 1.5 times for a deadlift. So like we're talking, 70 kilos plus 100-kilo deadlifts.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, and that's when you say, wow, but then again, when you're so experienced, like me,
when you're a CrossFitter of 12
you're
years.
a CrossFitter or an Olympic lifter, you're like, yeah, it's okay. No, I'm so down there now. And I picked squats as a heavy exercise because I hate them because they're hard. And because we didn't, so then you go, okay, well, we need to do it at the uni, and the squatting exercise or deadlifts, you need a lot more weights, and we didn't have access to that much weight actually there. And you can't drop the weight. So I went, squats are hard. Let's do squats and let's kind of pick an exercise that's really tiring. So instead of doing 1 rep max, I'm like, there's different sets of exercises, and we would always do like 5 repetitions and have a break and do that 5 times. And that I always found just so hard and I hated it. And I went, that's a good exercise to make the pelvic floor tired and see how great support is. So from a non-lifter lifter point of view, it was just the amount of weight that they regularly lifted. And we looked at them and I did a pop Q. We looked with ultrasound. And again, everyone's like, well, how come you didn't do this? How come you didn't do this? I'm like, the amount of, if you want to do pressure manometry, EMG, like how many things, we're physios. So we put things, pelvic floor physios, we're always in the vagina, right? We're used to being in the vagina, but we have people coming in who may have never had an assessment before. Like, how many things do you want me to put in there? I'm like, I'm trying to minimize the intimacy of this so that people want to come and participate, right? So we also had done some intra-abdominal pressure readings, but you can't do it while someone's lifting. So we had an intravaginal pressure transducer to measure pressure, but it's like a little tampon thing, and that tampon thing goes inside and it blocks descent. And I'm like, that's not a good thing, but I was advised, no, check. So we would have people put it in and bear down and measure the pressure, but then you're trying to say, this is how much pressure they can generate, but in that one moment. Anyway, I still was made to like take a lot of those readings, and I ended up just scrapping them and not using them. So the non-lifters versus the lifters, and we looked at avulsion, and essentially a big part of, God, I'm such a rambler. A big part of looking the studies that we haven't talked about that are published, and what I had found and what's changed my practice, especially the use of ultrasound, was assessing people between supine and standing. And so very early on, I noticed that if you measure people when they're lying down on their back, and getting people to descend and bear down is trying to replicate gravity and pressure, right? When you're standing, and looking into the research, most of it is you only use it if they're getting co-contraction, or it's not, when they bear down, it's not coming down to the point where they describe what their symptoms are. And I get that when someone has stage 3 and 4 prolapse, right? But we're talking about, like, we tried to collect data from people who had and didn't have symptoms, but all the people that had attended, really, especially for the lifters, there was only like 1 or 2 people that came forward that ended up that had symptoms. And I went early on and I went, this isn't going to work. So we decided just to focus on people who don't have symptoms. So the lifters, non-lifters are women who don't have the symptom of pelvic organ prolapse. They may have incontinence, but they don't have prolapse, and they don't have a history, at least in the last 3 months, because we use that pelvic floor distress inventory question, that they don't have that symptom of prolapse. So we know these are going to be like stage 0, 1, which is kind of normal and the same thing, and maybe some stage 2 where they don't have the symptom, but there could be a bit of descent. And if you measure them supine, and you look, there's a very big difference about what you then see standing, and even just standing at rest, because they might bear down. And what I also noticed, and I don't think we mentioned it in the papers that aren't published anyway, that these women who are all active, so sorry, the non-lifters are still very active. They're not sedentary. They do all activity very regularly. It's just not heavy lifting. All of these women suck at bearing down. Another thing I didn't say, all of these women have had at least 1 vaginal delivery. So I tried to, remember I said at the beginning, there's certain things that influence how much people are going to say they have pelvic floor issues. And we knew vaginal parity is one of those biggest ones. I wanted to take that out. So it wasn't, did they have a Caesar? And I went, no, we're keeping everyone who's had at least 1 vaginal delivery. So all these women have pushed a baby out. They know how to bear down. But
do they?
Okay, we're not going into Joe and Tam's research, but we will in the next one.
Guys, we have got an epic 1-day conference. It's our PB conference for those of you who've been to PB before. They're always a great day. This one's particularly special because we have both national and international speakers this time round. What we're trying to create is a day where we bring health professionals together who are interested in helping women have better births, i.e. prevent all of these issues in the future that women are facing. So, but we can't do it alone. Physios can't do it by themselves. OBs can't do it. Midwives can't do it alone. We need to do it together, and we need to all get on the same page, obviously with the woman at the forefront of the conversation. So better births is about, considering all of the variables that women face, and essentially making sure that we as health professionals promote both education and choice, so women truly have informed consent when they're making decisions about their birth. They decide who they're going to birth with, where they're going to birth, what type of birth they want to have, and we just essentially empower them to do so. So we've got speakers such as Dr. Jessica Caldwell-Hall from Penrith, who's written a lot about levator anovulsion and preventing that. And we've got Professor Kari Bow. She is. I can't wait. Professor Kari Bow is coming all the way over from Norway.
What?
Popping a little head over for a few days for us, because she's obviously been thinking about this for a long time as well. And I can't wait to listen to her insight. We've got the lovely Taryn Hallam giving us her wonderful talk on what actually is informed consent and how we make sure women do choose properly.
That will be brilliant.
We've got Professor Deborah Davies from the University of Canberra talking about education. I'm not going to list them all. There's so many. Dr. Vijay Roach, who's just a very, very special man who is all about inclusion of all health professionals and very respectful of everybody's opinion, which is wonderful. We've got GPs, midwives, and even Laura Whitburn, who has published her PhD on the pain of labour and gives us a really nice perspective on the pain of labour. And Professor Susan Walker is coming to join us. She wears many hats, but one of which is sitting on the board of the Stillbirth Foundation. So she's going to talk to us about ways in which we can think about preventing stillbirth, which of course is a very, very important topic. So it's going to be an exceptional day. As I said, one day in
It'll be
Sydney
amazing.
at Pier 1 in a beautiful location.
And you have someone who's experienced stillbirth coming too to discuss their story, who's been on the podcast before as well.
Yes. Lovely
Heidi.
Heidi. Yeah.
Oh, that'll be beautiful.
It will be beautiful. And I think obviously that lived experience is very powerful, and she is on a mission to help other women make sure they prevent her experience, which is amazing. So it is going to be a sensational day, and there are still tickets. So we would love to have a sellout crowd as we have done in the past. And so, yes, thanks for the little time for the ad, Laurie.
Oh, June 13th, 2025. And where is it?
Sydney, Pier 1 in Sydney.
Pier 1 in Sydney.
Also, Vivid
we'll
is on at the time. If anyone has been dreaming of going to Vivid, now is your chance, because the venue has like one wall is all glass overlooking the Opera House.
Oh my
So
God.
as we enter the end of the day, we'll see a bit of Vivid, which would be delightful.
Okay.
Of course, you're all going to stay for drinks and canapes.
Yes. And it's not just for physios. This is for the public or more for all health professionals?
Health professionals. So we've got heaps of midwives coming, obstetricians, acupuncturists, exercise physiologists, and of course, pelvic health physios. Yeah.
Perfect. Be there. But they have managed to push a baby out, right?
Yes.
So yes, they know how to bear down.
It has come out.
It came out. But then this is again ends up into your research. So many of them, when they bear down, suck. And you're like, no, push harder. No, actually relax your pelvic floor. But they struggled. But you're like, yeah, but these are also physically active women. And in a clinical sense, you're like, I'm glad you suck because you're doing activity that increases intra-abdominal pressure, because everything does. And you can't relax your pelvic floor and bear down at the same time. And we know the women who have a lot of symptoms and have stage 3 and 4 are really good at letting go. They're so good at letting go when they bear down that you're like, I see why you have all these problems. So it was interesting that a lot of these women just couldn't bear down a lot. And so when you get them standing, at least standing at rest compared to supine pushing down, things actually sat lower. You're like, okay, now we're actually looking at them the way they probably are. Also, majority of their exercise, bar, push-ups, sit-ups, bench press is standing, or it's at least up against gravity. So we did up against gravity. I looked at rest. I looked at contraction. I looked at bearing down using transperineal ultrasound. We still did it all in supine. We did pop Q in supine because pop Q in standing is way too hard.
I was about to say, I don't remember you doing that. How would you do that?
You can, but I think.
Do you do it, Tam?
Yeah, you.
No, I don't pop Q per se, but I think you can get a sense of it.
I was just thinking, how do you use that little stick?
Sorry, not GH plus Vivid. No.
But even like, I think exactly what you're, alluding to, Tam, and how you would do it, assessing with your fingers, standing, awesome. But using a stick to get accurate, objective numbers for research, way too hard.
Impossible.
That's why I went, okay, we're not going to do it standing. But because these women aren't descending generally past the hymen at all, transperineal ultrasound isn't stopping the amount of descent. And the more that you do it in a standing and even supine position, you know that your connection of the ultrasound to the vulva, you have to let go a little bit to allow for just general tissue movement so that you're not stopping them from actually descending. So we looked at standing, so supine versus standing, and then
was this after lifting? Did you make them?
So when we compared non-lifters versus lifters, this is all before exercise, right? We tried to get them early in the morning before they did anything with their children, because my one of the couple year, let's try to standardize the position of people's organs and have them lying down for half an hour before we assess them to see if we can get everyone back to like a baseline, really doesn't do anything. Unless you go to their bedside before they wake up in the morning, you're not really starting with maybe where they actually are, but we're still trying to make it as functional as possible. So that's where we then took the lifter versus non-lifter. that's where that information came from. And again,
Mm.
not really a difference between the two groups. Standing shows less support than lying. So you
Mhm.
stand, everything drops a little bit, but not really different between the two groups, which again, like Middlecoff paper, shows that those who are often heavy lifting and those who aren't heavy lifting in a general sense aren't worse, right? Because you would think women who heavy lift all the time probably have everything sitting lower, whereas actually there's not really a difference between the two groups,
Yeah, okay, cool.
right? And then we took the heavy lifters that day, and after we assessed them, we went down to the gym and we did some heavy lifting. Are we going to get cut off on the Zoom?
No,
No, no.
no.
No, okay.
No.
Because I'm talking so much.
So
So took the heavy lifters, went down to the gym, had already calculated based on their information how much weight they're lifting. And so we had like a little predetermined warm up and stretch and lead into their 80% of their 1 rep max to do 5 reps, break for like a minute and a half, and do that 5 times to the point of fatigue.
Mm.
So there was about 30. So in total, there was 73 women cut into half. So like 36 and 37, math. 37 heavy lifters, I think 36 non-lifters, COVID in the middle of it all. So I honestly wanted like 150 each side, but obviously that didn't happen. So we took the heavy lifters, went downstairs and did the heavy lifting, went straight back upstairs, emptied the bladder and redid it. Pop Q, ultrasound.
And what'd you find?
Well, again, there was little difference between so yes, some descent, right? But not enough, like I can't say not enough. There was little look at, I'm going to read my abstract because I have it right here to tell you.
Fair.
So this one was titled The Immediate Impact of Heavy Lifting on Pelvic Floor Morphometry in Vaginally Porous Women. So really what we found, if we're trying to get specific enough, was compared to pre-lifting, there was no significant change in ultrasound measures of bladder, neck, and rectum. Now, we didn't look at cervix with ultrasound because it was way too hard. And it's only now that I've been doing sonography for a while. I'm like, oh my God, it would have been so easy. So there no significant change in bladder and rectum at rest or bearing down, in supine or in standing, or during vaginal descent after lifting. We also had found after lifting, yes, there was a lower bladder neck height in supine when someone squeezed their pelvic floor muscles. There was an increase in anorectal angle, again, at rest in supine as well as standing, and an increase in levator hiatal area in supine when we're bearing down, right? Because we know when we're standing, that muscle kind of has to work. Yeah, so there was kind of little changes immediately after. Now, we don't know what happens an hour after. It's one session. I mean, they'd been working out all week, but at one point we went, well, let's leave them for an hour and then we'll reassess. We'll let them sit down and rest for an hour and then reassess. Again, trying to keep people there, trying to then have that time. There's so many things you want to do in research that it's just not feasible and you just can't. But initially, again, we actually found acute changes afterwards of people who are regularly accustomed to it, who don't have symptoms, have little change afterwards. There's
so
a bit
organs
of
don't
fatigue.
really move. Pelvic floor doesn't really change. A little bit,
Tiny
more
little
fatigued,
bit.
but nothing major.
Exactly. Little bit
Yeah.
of fatigue, not a big difference.
Yeah. So if the pelvic floor doesn't
Groundbreaking.
really change, then even might be a bit much to say, but even if organs are a little lower, the support still is there even after the lift. Yeah.
And one day, what would be great, right, is to follow these women after a year, after 5 years. Another great thing to look at, anyone listening, this is the research you're going to start doing, right, is to take people who've never done strength training or exercise or heavy, not exercise, no exercises would be great, but heavy lifting, and follow them over time, doing a gradual progressive into heavy lifting and see how their pelvic floor goes, right? And I think we need so much more research done on Paris women and vaginally
Mm.
Paris women because we
Mm.
do a lot of it on nullips, but yeah,
And it would be amazing to have some with symptoms, right? And some
definitely. Yeah.
without symptoms, and then
Yeah.
watch both of them. Yeah.
I would love to see people who have symptoms
Mm.
do a strength training program. Because remember, you can do like hip thrusts, bench press. There's so much stuff supine that you can start with, but you also need to make them functional and strong for being upright. I had this beautiful woman in her 60s who had, you know, bilateral avulsion, significant prolapse, had a surgery. 8 weeks later, saw her. Surgery's failed.
Gone.
It's down where, she had there was no mesh, so we could use a pessary. Pessary doesn't stay in very well
Very difficult.
at that point. But what she loved to do, she loved volunteering as a paramedic,
Mm.
like a paramedic aide. And there's a little bit of lifting patients. And even if she didn't lift patients, she's on her feet, standing all day. And you don't want to take that away because it is what she absolutely loves. That's her joy in life. And we've really struggled to try to get her back to it, but not then exacerbate. And then where does she go from there, right? Sacrocolpopexy is probably her next line, but then you're in such a vulnerable position that again, the chances of it failing can be pretty high without taking all that away from her. And I mean, I think I don't know what the end was with her because I think that's where I started to actually I must have just, changed careers or jobs or something at that point that I kind of fell out of touch with her at that, or then she went back to the surgeon. And anyway, you just go, those are the people that in that moment, what do we do for them? And you think, okay, we need to work so much on prevention, right? We need to capture these people, which is so hard. How do you convince all of this to women and people before they have a pregnancy, right? Before their first pregnancy, get them. But I think
Education.
well, that's what we're trying to do, right? But yeah,
I think we're going to maybe have to do this series in
oh yeah,
two
you have to
parts.
leave.
What do you think,
Yeah.
Tam? I think we're halfway through all the questions we probably want to ask you.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's good. What do you think, Tam? I kind of think we could go part 1, part 2.
I reckon that's actually a very good idea. I mean, I just told my mum I'd be late, but I also do
I'm
feel
so
which
sorry.
my
Oh,
mum doesn't
God.
care. Mum doesn't care.
I know. I
Mum
didn't even look at
care.
the time.
We got the
Run.
whole day later. My
Yeah.
mum does not
Yeah.
care.
Okay.
So it's up to you. But equally, I do think it will go for. I feel like we could. I reckon
We could go another
chunk
hour, I
it.
reckon.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it would do it a disservice to even try cut it into another 20 minutes or
Yes.
something like that. And
I
I feel
agree.
like we could almost, like, I'd love to listen to that back and then, do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, get the next set coming
I love
through.
how you're talking with your fingers. Like
Well, I always
no,
do
no,
that,
you're
sorry.
two
Oh, the
assessing
two
fingers. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well,
Okay.
I just wanted to say one thing to maybe wrap up this one, whether it works or not. But I think, Laurie, I just want to pause for a moment and go, you have absolutely changed
Yes.
how we have practiced with women who want to get back to the gym. And it's just incredibly important, this research that you've done. If you, like you say, if you think about all of the risk factors that go with not exercising, particularly perimenopausal, postmenopausal women, bone density, cardiovascular risk factors, for us to change the way we practice and not, as clinicians, be scared of making prolapses worse or give prolapses at all, it's significantly changed our practice, which is what you want research to do, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with Jo, because although you are annoyed that your research in the end did not get published or you didn't get to show what you wanted to show, just even posing the question, like Jo said at the beginning, way back when we read that first cross-sectional survey, we didn't even think like that. You thought differently. And then you just even posing that question made everyone start to think differently. And therefore, the amount of women you have saved from being told not to exercise is huge.
Massive.
So, yeah.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Congratulations.
Oh, yay.
Yeah,
And that's, look,
absolutely.
it's always been about the journey and trying to make some change. So it's nice that
You
know,
have.
I
You have.
manipulated minds well.
You did.
You did.
I used the
Ours
force.
included.
Yes.